Dear students, welcome you all in this lecture. Today, our topic for discussion is Kashmir conflict, a challenge to the Indian state. Some of the key objectives of the current lecture are to understand the history of Kashmir, examine the origin of the insurgency in Kashmir, and third important is to understand the Kashmir conflict and how it is a challenge to the Indian state. So let me begin by discussing the brief history of Kashmir. The pre-1947 state of Jammu and Kashmir, hereafter referred to as Kashmir, constitutes Jammu, Chenab Valley, Kashmir and Leh and Kargil, commonly known as Ladakh, while as Muzaffarabad and Gilgit-Baltistan presently in Pakistani controlled. State of Jammu and Kashmir was one of the 560 odd princely states of British India. The state in its pre-1947 structure came into existence as a result of the Treaty of Amritsar signed between East India Company and the Raja Gulab Singh of Jammu region. Raja Gulab Singh belongs to a dynasty of Hindu Dogras, the ruling clan of the Jammu district. Subsequently, the territory ceased to be part of the Sikh kingdom and was realigned into a princely state under the Dogra regime. The Dogras ruled the state till the British left the Indian subcontinent in 1947. The state of Jammu and Kashmir shares frontiers with several countries: Afghanistan, Pakistan, Tibet and China. Given its unique geographical status in the Indian subcontinent, command and control over the territory has a tremendous military advantage. Moreover, it also has a rich water potential, mineral resources and natural beauty to attract tourists. At the time of the British withdrawal from the Indian subcontinent, these princely states were given a choice to accede and merge with either of the two newly emerged dominions, India and Pakistan, in line with the geographical contiguity, demography and the wishes of the people. They were also given a choice to remain independent if they wished so. However, Lord Mountbatten, the last British Viceroy of India, insisted that the third option was merely nominal. Except for Junagadh, Hyderabad, Kashmir and Manipur, all princely states signed the instrument of accession with either of the two dominions under the Independence Act of 1947. Even though the issue of political dispensation of Junagadh, Hyderabad and Manipur were resolved immediately after 1947, Jammu and Kashmir continues to remain a challenge for India, both with domestic and international dimensions. Like other princely states, Jammu and Kashmir had the choice to opt for either of the two dominions, India and Pakistan, in 1947. However, the state attained complexity because of its plural and ethno-regional character. Geographically, it was contiguous to both India and Pakistan, with a very close trade with Xinjiang, Tibet and Afghanistan and Iran in the past. At the time of partition, it had a Hindu ruler and a mixed population of many religious groups, among whom Muslims constitute the predominant majority. Moreover, unlike other princely states, the last Dogra autocratic ruler, Maharaja Hari Singh, wanted to establish an independent state. So, instead of making a bold decision of accession with either of the two dominions that would have resolved the issue of his state's international status, Maharaja Hari Singh vacillated. Meanwhile, the communal violence across the Indian subcontinent intensified, along with the people's movement in Kashmir against autocratic rule. It started with a revolt in the Punch, the northern part of Jammu province against the Jagir system, a feudal type of estate where the landlord exercised civil and judicial rights, that broke out in August 1947. The news of the Pooch revolt and communal violence in Jammu against Muslims reached neighboring state of Pakistan. Consequently, scores of truckloads of tribesmen entered Kashmir from the tribal areas situated between the inner frontier, which bounds the regularly administered districts of North-West Frontier Province and the Durand Line, which defines the border with Afghanistan. The tribesmen reached Baramulla, just 35 miles away from the Srinagar city, within a few days. Finding that he could no longer defend Kashmir with his limited resources, Maharaja Hari Singh asked India for armed assistance to deal with this situation without offering to accede. However, the government of India took the view that it would be height of the folly to send troops into a neutral state. Amid the political crisis within Kashmir, the Maharaja fled the capital of Srinagar and at Jammu renewed his request to the Indian government for the military support to stop the tribal invasion into the Kashmir and the instrument of accession for acceptance by the government of India. Lord Mountbatten, then Governor General, on behalf of the government of India, accepted this accession on the condition that as soon as law and order have been restored in Kashmir and its soil cleared of the invader, a reference to the people should settle the question of states' accession. Thus, the Indian Army entered the state on 27th October 1947 to repel the invaders. Pakistan responded to the move by sending its regular forces to Kashmir. Consequently, the first war over Kashmir breaks out between India and Pakistan. Thereafter, Kashmir was effectively bifurcated between what has been known as India and Pakistani controlled parts of Jammu and Kashmir, and thus emerged as a bone of contention between the two. India controls approximately 2/3 of the original state and rest is controlled by Pakistan. In 1963, Pakistan also ceded a small tract of its territorial claim in northern Kashmir to China, thereby enabling China to build a road to connect the provinces of Tibet and Xinjiang. Arbitrary bifurcation of the state has pushed Kashmir and its people historically at the crossroads of the civilization interface to geographical seclusion, economic disconnect, and socio-psychological insecurity. Maharaja's belated decision of accession to the Indian Union under the challenge of tribal invasion of the state had not helped settle the state's political placement effectively and unquestionably. His late decision prompted a first military clash between India and Pakistan, followed by international diplomatic contestations within and outside the United Nations organization ever since. So this was a brief historical background of the Kashmir. Now let me come to the next section of this current lecture, which is about the insurgency in Kashmir. India's position is that Kashmir became an integral part of India after the Maharaja Hari Singh signed the instrument of accession with the Union of India on 26th October 1947. The decision, according to Indian state, was later approved by the Jammu and Kashmir State Constituent Assembly under the leadership of Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad in mid-1950s. The accession of the state of Jammu and Kashmir took place as per the provisions of the India Independence Act and is final and legal and cannot be disputed. The only matter what India is willing to discuss is Pakistan's relinquishing control of that part of Jammu and Kashmir that it illegally occupies. Nevertheless, Kashmir was accorded a special status within the Indian Constitution under the Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, giving it considerable autonomy within the India's quasi-federal system. India's central government also provided a substantial financial subsidy to facilitate the economic development of Kashmir. However, it is important to discuss here that on the 5th of August 2019, the Union Home Minister of India, Mr. Amit Shah, moved a statutory resolution in the Indian Parliament to revoke the Article 370 of the Indian Constitution along with the bifurcation of the state into two union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. Back in the late 1980s, the situation worsened after the insurgency started in Kashmir. It is generally argued that the 1987 J&K Assembly elections played a critical role, as there was accusation of misconduct in the 1987 elections. The 1987 State Assembly election is considered the most compromised in Kashmir's history. Congress Party and the National Conference jointly contested the state elections. They were opposed by the Muslim United Front, commonly known as MUF, a conglomeration of the several political parties. According to Sumit Ganguly, voters were intimidated, ballot boxes tampered with, and candidates threatened. Several key insurgent leaders such as Shabir Shah, Yasin Malik, and Javed Mir were polling agents for the Muslim United Front in this 1987 state elections. The extensive electoral malfeasances that they witnessed in 1987 convinced this younger generation of Kashmirs that the national government in New Delhi had a scant regard for their political rights and reckless disregard for the democratic procedures. With no institutional recourse open for expressing their disenchantment with the flawed political process, they resorted to violence. Indeed, Pakistan exploited the situation and allowed its territory to be used by the insurgent groups operating in Kashmir to get training and weaponry to fight India's military might. As a result, Kashmir once again attracted global attention. This is how the insurgency started in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, and which is still going on. Now, coming to the next section of this lecture is the Kashmir crisis and how it's a major challenge for the Indian state. The political crisis in Kashmir has posed two significant challenges for India: a radicalization within Kashmir and diplomatic challenge at the international level. Since 1989, the eruption of insurgency in Kashmir has been a serious problem for the government of India. It started with the 1987 rigged elections. According to Union Minister Dr. Jitendra Singh, Kashmir's turning point was, and I quote, a rigged assembly election of 1987 when Farooq Abdullah was the chief minister of the state and Rajiv Gandhi was the prime minister of India. The 1987 rigged elections drove a section of local youth towards militancy. And according to Sumit Ganguly, the crisis in Kashmir reflects the growing and larger problem of India's political institutions. The decay has included the steady organizational decline of the once dominant Congress party, the politicization of the civil services and judiciary, the reliance on the military to restore public order, and the overall lack of probity in public life. Moreover, from the early 1970s, governments became increasingly centralized, resulting in the conflicts between the central government and emerging elites in the different parts of India that frequently ended in the dismissal or the subversion of legally constituted governments on many occasions within the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Taking advantage of the situation, Pakistan provided both logistic and diplomatic support to the militancy in Kashmir. And it is pertinent to mention here that the Kashmiris never took to arms to fight the Indian state in the past. For example, in 1947 and in 1965, when India-Pakistan engaged in full-fledged wars, Kashmiris did not support Pakistan. However, in 1990, the Indian state was confronted with the violence in Kashmir for the first time. Despite many attempts by Delhi government, militancy is still going on in Kashmir Valley. Since the inception of the insurgency in 1989, thousands of people have lost their lives. According to official records, around 50,000 people have lost their lives in the turmoil in Kashmir. This is in addition to the tremendous economic, social, psychological and material loss that the people have suffered. It also forced hundreds of thousands of Hindu minorities from their homes. Though the number of the militants and militant organizations has been considerably declined compared to what it was in the beginning of militancy in early 1990s. In January 2022, the security agencies stated the number of active militants in Kashmir less than 200. Yet, it's a challenging task for the government of India to bring complete normalcy to the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and restore its democratic setup. For example, in 2013, police had put the total number of militants operating in Kashmir at 78, calling that the lowest since the eruption of militancy in Kashmir. Yet, it is still going on. So, therefore, considering that the number of militants may be less than 200, but it is a major challenge for the government of India to bring complete normalcy. Moreover, various international terror outfits such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS have been trying to make ground in Kashmir. In a video, Nawai Afghan Jihad, the online publication of Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, outlined plans to rename the magazine as Nawai Ghazwai Hind, a move that experts said pointed to the group's decision to focus on India, especially Kashmir. The 135-page magazine carried an article titled Kandahar to Doda, the Season of Hopes, written by a Kashmiri man named Muhammad Shakir Trali, who spoke of AQIS efforts to strengthen its presence in Kashmir. Moreover, the ISIS flags were raised during stone pelting incidents in parts of Kashmir on many occasions in the past. Over the years, Pakistan has made desperate attempts to internationalize the Kashmir issue through military and diplomatic means. India-Pakistan engaged in 3 wars, first 2 in 1947 and 1965, mainly because of the Kashmir. Besides, in the 1999 mini Kargil war. However, it could not change the situation in Kashmir, but through its diplomatic efforts, it has been able to bring Kashmir to the international stage after a very long gap. After the Tashkent agreements in 1966, Kashmir was relegated to the UN. After the nuclearization of the South Asia in 1998, followed by the Kargil war, and of late the abrogation of Article 370 has brought back international attention to Kashmir. In 2019, UN Security Council held a resolution on Kashmir after more than 5 decades. In 2019, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, spoke about Kashmir in his maiden UN General Assembly speech. Therefore, India is posed with a double challenge. On the one hand, it has to address the internal dimension of the Kashmir problem, while on the other hand, it has to counter Pakistan supported by China. The situation became more difficult for India after the China initiated the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, generally known as CPEC, and the abrogation of Article 370 in 2019. India argues that the corridor is an invasion of the Indian territory as it passes through Gilgit-Baltistan in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Therefore, it challenges the sovereignty of India. The abrogation of Article 370, on the other hand, triggered an unprecedented international response, especially to the restrictions imposed in the region in the aftermath of the decision. Most of the countries agreed that the changes in Jammu and Kashmir were India's internal matter and differences should be resolved through dialogue between India and Pakistan. However, some of India's strategic partners and long-standing friends have expressed concerns and criticized the communication clampdown, the detention of political leaders, and the restriction of civil liberties. It has now arguably become India's most significant diplomatic challenge to combat the narrative that the Indian state is suppressing the rights of Kashmiris. Thus, India has a challenging task ahead. It has to address the security concerns raised by the militancy in Kashmir, and at the same time, it needs to maintain its democratic credentials. Externally, it has a neighboring country that will try to sabotage the situation through all possible means, diplomatic and proxy wars. For India to become a 21st century economic powerhouse and to secure its permanent seat in the UN Security Council, it must resolve the issue of Kashmir. Dear students, with this I am signing off today's lecture. Hope you have enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.